The night had come quietly over the small, isolated planet where Kale lived. His hut sat at the edge of a forest, far from any town or village. He liked the quiet, the way the wind whispered through the trees, and how the stars scattered across the sky like tiny diamonds. Kale had always been a simple man, spending his days tending small gardens, repairing tools, and helping the occasional traveler who happened to pass his way. Life was peaceful, predictable, and safe. Or at least it had been until that night. A storm had begun just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Clouds rolled across the sky, dark and heavy, carrying rain that tapped and drummed against the roof of his hut. Kale sat by the small fire he kept in the center of the room, stirring a pot of herbal tea. The wind howled outside, shaking the thin walls of his home. It was in the middle of this storm that he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound that made him pause. A soft groan, mixed with the rustling of leaves, came from just beyond the edge of the clearing. Curiosity and concern pushed Kale to his feet. He grabbed his cloak and stepped out into the pouring rain. The ground was soft and slippery, but he moved carefully toward the sound. As he reached the edge of the clearing, he saw a shape lying among the wet grass. At first, he thought it might be a deer or some other creature, but the figure was not animal. It was small, delicate, and strangely beautiful, with skin that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. He could barely make out wings, thin, transparent, and trembling with every gust of wind. Kale approached slowly, calling softly, "Are you okay?" "Can you hear me?" The figure did not respond. Its chest rose and fell weakly, but the breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. Panic surged through Kale. He knelt beside the being and gently lifted it into his arms. The wings were fragile, and a faint hum seemed to come from them, almost like a soft melody. "You'll be safe now," he whispered, wrapping the creature in his cloak. The rain soaked through both of them, but Kale did not care. He carried her into the warmth of his hut and closed the door against the storm. Inside, Kale laid her down on a soft mat and pulled blankets around her. Her skin had a faint glow, blue and soft, like moonlight reflected on water. There were cuts along her arms and legs, and her clothing, if it could even be called that, was torn and wet. Kale fetched clean water and a cloth and began to wash the dirt and blood from her skin. Every movement was careful. He didn't want to hurt her more than she already was. Hours passed, and Kale stayed by her side. He made a fire brighter, moved her gently when she shifted, and spoke to her in a soothing voice. "It's okay, you're safe now," he said, again and again. He didn't know if she understood his words, but the act of speaking comforted him as much as it might comfort her. He noticed markings on her skin, symbols etched faintly, glowing slightly in the firelight. They were beautiful, intricate, and unlike anything Kale had ever seen. Something about them suggested knowledge, intelligence, and a history far older than the small planet he called home. Despite the storm outside and the chill in the air, a strange warmth filled the hut. Kale found himself watching her, marveling at the delicate curves of her wings and the way her chest moved as she breathed. He had never seen anything like her before. She was not human, that was clear, but there was something in her presence that made him feel connected, as if they shared some silent understanding. He fetched more blankets, wrapping her as warmly as he could. Then he sat back and looked at her, wondering where she had come from and why she was here. She did not wake, and Kale feared that she might not survive the night, but he refused to leave her side. He had learned long ago that life could be fragile, and when someone, or something, needed help, you stayed, no matter how long it took. As the hours stretched on, Kale thought about the stars beyond the hut's small windows. He imagined the places she might have come from, the worlds she might have seen, the dangers she might have faced. A part of him felt fear for her, and yet another part felt excitement. If she survived, she could show him something beyond his quiet life, something extraordinary. But for now, all he could do was wait and care for her. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Kale prepared a simple mixture of herbs and warm water, hoping it might help her regain strength. He whispered to her as he worked, telling her stories of the small planet, the forest, the little animals that scurried through the underbrush. His voice was gentle, steady, and patient, even as his heart raced with worry. Time passed slowly, but the storm began to fade. Rain turned to a light drizzle, and the wind calmed to a soft sigh through the trees. Kale stayed awake, keeping watch, listening to her breathing, and hoping that when morning came, she would open her eyes. Hours before dawn, he noticed her chest rising and falling a little more steadily. A small, almost imperceptible movement in her fingers caught his attention. "You're waking up," Kale whispered, almost afraid to speak too loudly. He reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. She twitched slightly, and a soft hum escaped her lips. Kale smiled. It was faint, but it was life. The night had been long, filled with fear and hope, but Cavail realized something important. He had done what he could, not with skill or magic, but with patience, care, and a willingness to stay beside someone when they needed him most. That, he thought, was enough. He did not know who she was or where she had come from, but he felt a sense of purpose he had never felt before. As the first rays of morning light peeked through the clouds, Kale leaned back, exhausted but hopeful. He had saved a life, perhaps the most important life he would ever encounter. And though he did not know what the day would bring, he felt ready to face it. For the first time in a long while, he believed that extraordinary things could happen, even in the quietest corners of the universe. The alien lay there, fragile but alive, and Kale knew that everything was about to change. Her presence brought not just mystery, but a possibility he had never imagined. And though the world outside was still stormy, inside Kale's small hut, a new kind of light, hopeful, fragile, and beautiful, had begun to grow. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting warm light over Kale's small hut and the damp forest around it. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and sweet, with the scent of wet soil and flowers. Kale moved quietly around the hut, careful not to disturb the delicate alien lying on the mat. Her breathing was steadier now, her chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm. He watched her for a moment, noting the faint glow that still emanated from her skin. It was soft, almost like the light of the morning sun reflecting on water. He brought a cup of warm herbal water to her lips. At first, she did not respond, but when he held it closer, her lips parted slightly, and she took a small sip. Kyle smiled softly. "That's good," he whispered. "Take your time." Her eyes fluttered open again, revealing large, luminous irises that seemed to contain the colors of a sky at sunset. For a moment, Kale simply stared, mesmerized by their depth. They were intelligent, curious, and somehow they seemed to recognize him. She tried to speak, and a soft, melodic sound left her lips. Kale leaned closer. "I don't understand your language," he said gently, "but I will try to help you." He noticed her hands moving slightly, pointing at objects around the room. He realized she was trying to communicate, using gestures in place of words. He nodded encouragingly, hoping she would feel safe enough to continue. Kyle spent the rest of the morning preparing a small, clean space for her in the hut. He arranged blankets, cushions, and some simple food he had on hand. He showed her where the water was, and indicated the small garden outside where she could sit if she wanted sunlight. She followed him hesitantly, wings folded against her back, and sat in the sun. Kale noticed how careful she was with her movements, how she avoided touching anything too roughly, as if she had been trained to be gentle. Over the next few days, Kale tried to learn more about her. He gave her the name Lyra, after the constellation he had always admired in the night sky. Every morning, he would point to the stars and trace the patterns with his finger, hoping she would understand. At first, she only watched quietly, tilting her head as if studying him. Slowly, she began to respond with her own gestures, pointing, nodding, and sometimes touching the stars in the sky through the window, as if she remembered them from somewhere far away. Lyra's recovery was gradual. Each day she moved a little more confidently, exploring the small hut and the garden outside. Cale watched with fascination as she interacted with the world, noting how she seemed to notice details most humans would overlook. The way a leaf trembled in the wind, how sunlight reflected on water droplets, the small movements of insects in the soil. It was as if she saw life differently, more fully, more carefully. Cale felt both amazed and humbled. He had always thought he understood the world, but in Lyra's presence, he realized there was so much more to see and feel. Cale tried to communicate with her in every way he could. He drew pictures, pointed to objects, mimicked her gestures, and spoke slowly, clearly, hoping she would pick up on the meanings. She responded in kind, pointing at items, nodding, and occasionally making the melodic sounds that fascinated Cale. He laughed quietly when she mimicked his clumsy attempts at drawing, and she made a small, soft sound that seemed like amusement. It was their own small language built on patience, observation, and trust. One afternoon, Cale brought a small sketch pad and some charcoal. He drew simple symbols: a tree, the sun, a bird, a house. Lyra watched intently, then drew next to him, delicate, flowing symbols that glowed faintly on the page. Cale studied them carefully, tracing each line with his fingers. He realized they were not random marks. They were meaningful, a language of light and shapes. He felt a thrill of excitement. If he could understand her symbols, he might learn where she had come from, why she had come to his world, and what her people were like. Lyra seemed to sense his curiosity. She pointed to the sky, then to herself, and finally touched Cale's chest lightly. He understood the gesture immediately. She had traveled far through the stars, and now she trusted him enough to share part of her journey. Cale felt a deep sense of responsibility. Her life had been endangered, and now, more than ever, it was his duty to keep her safe. As they spent time together, Cale noticed something remarkable. Lyra did not seem afraid of him, and he did not feel fear around her. There was a mutual respect, an unspoken understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. D.A. She moved gracefully through the hut, helping with small chores, showing him patterns in nature he had never noticed. In return, Cale taught her about his small world, how to plant seeds, care for animals, and use herbs for healing. Despite the calm, Cale knew there was danger beyond the forest. He had heard stories of alien factions, explorers who traveled through galaxies and were sometimes pursued by those who feared the unknown. He did not know if Lyra had been running from such enemies, but he sensed the tension in her movements, the way she sometimes glanced toward the horizon, as if listening for something he could not hear. Cale's heart tightened at the thought. He wished he could protect her from everything, even the unseen dangers of the universe. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Cale and Lyra sat by the edge of the garden. He held a small, glowing crystal he had found in the forest earlier that day. He showed it to her, and her eyes widened in recognition. She reached out carefully, tracing the lines of the crystal with her fingers. A soft hum filled the air, faint but beautiful, as if the crystal responded to her touch. Cale felt a shiver run down his spine. He had no idea what it was, but he knew it was important to her. Lyra's trust in him continued to grow. She began to share small details about her world, though always in gestures, symbols, and the glowing hums that seemed to carry meaning. Cale learned that her people were explorers, traveling to share knowledge and learn about new worlds. She had been on a mission when something had gone wrong, leaving her stranded and injured. Cale realized that she had not only survived a dangerous journey, but had found the courage to trust a stranger. That trust was a gift he would never take lightly. Days turned into a week, and Cale felt a mixture of awe and wonder. He had saved her life, but in return, she had opened his eyes to something much larger than the small world he had known. There was beauty intelligence, and kindness beyond his imagination, and it had arrived at his doorstep in the form of a fragile, glowing being. He felt a quiet pride in his role, not as a hero, but as someone who had chosen compassion, patience, and care. That choice, he realized, was what made humans special. One night, as Kale prepared another warm drink for her, he noticed Lyra standing by the window, gazing at the stars. Her wings were slightly open, catching the light of the moon. Kale felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He did not know what awaited her beyond his small planet, or what dangers might return, but he knew he could not keep her here forever. She was meant for the stars, and perhaps she would take him along in some small way. As he joined her by the window, Kale felt a quiet connection, unspoken, but real. They shared a look, a moment of understanding that went beyond words. In that instant, he realized that his life had changed forever. He had gone from being a simple healer on a quiet planet to a guardian, a friend, and perhaps a part of a story far greater than he had ever imagined. The night grew deeper, and the forest whispered around them. Kale and Lyra sat together, watching the sky, dreaming of worlds they had never seen, and sharing a bond that needed no language. Kale understood that whatever the future held, he would face it with patience, courage, and compassion. For now, it was enough to know that she was alive, that she trusted him, and that together they had begun a journey that could reach the stars. The days passed quietly, almost peacefully, but Kale felt a subtle change in the air. Lyra moved with more purpose now, her eyes often scanning the horizon, her fingers tracing patterns in the air as if she could sense something beyond the forest. Kale watched her carefully, feeling a mixture of awe and unease. He did not know what she was sensing, but it was clear that the world beyond his small hut was beginning to call to her. One evening, as the sky turned gold and pink with the setting sun, Kale noticed shadows moving in the distance. At first, he thought it might be animals, but the shapes were too tall, too precise. They moved with a coordinated rhythm, their forms unlike any creatures he had seen. His heart began to race. Kale had heard stories of travelers who were pursued by unknown forces, but he never imagined that such beings could come here, to his quiet planet. Lyra turned sharply, her wings fluttering slightly in alarm. Her eyes glowed faintly as she focused on the shapes approaching. Kale felt a shiver of fear. He had never seen her like this before, so alert, so aware. She stood slowly, moving between him and the window, a quiet, protective presence. Kale realized then that she was not only fragile beauty, she carried within her strength and confidence that he had not fully understood. The shapes drew closer, and Kale could finally see them clearly. They were tall, elegant, and armored, their forms shimmering under the fading light. Their movements were deliberate, calm, but powerful.
Kale's mind raced. Who were they?
Were they enemies? And if so, could he protect Lyra from beings that seemed far beyond his understanding? Lyra stepped forward before he could react. She raised her hands, her wings opening slightly, and a soft glow radiated from her body. The warriors halted at the edge of the clearing, their attention fixed entirely on her. Kale watched, breathless, as she began to communicate in a series of gestures and subtle, glowing signals. The warriors responded almost immediately, their forms shifting, their lights pulsing, as if acknowledging her. Kyle realized, slowly, that these were not hostile invaders. They were protectors, sent to ensure Lyra's safety. Relief washed over him, mixed with amazement. He had never imagined beings like this. Creatures so powerful and majestic, guided not by aggression but by purpose and honor. Lyra's calm confidence made Kale realize that she had always been part of a larger world, one that operated on rules and understanding far beyond what he had known. The warriors approached carefully, bowing slightly in her presence. Lyra responded with gestures that Kale could not fully understand, yet he could feel the meaning. Trust, acknowledgement, and respect. The interaction was almost ceremonial, filled with a quiet dignity that left Kale awestruck. He had always believed in courage, but now he saw it in a different form. Strength combined with wisdom. Power guided by compassion. Cale stepped forward hesitantly. "Are they dangerous?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned her head slightly toward him, her eyes glowing softly, and then gestured gently toward him. He understood her meaning immediately. They were not here to harm him. He felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. Somehow, by caring for her, he had earned the respect of these extraordinary beings. The tallest of the warriors extended a hand, not in threat, but in greeting. Lyra moved forward, placing her hand against theirs, and a quiet energy seemed to pass between them. Cale watched as a connection formed, one that transcended words, cultures, and even species. He realized that this moment was not just about her safety, it was about understanding, communication, and the bonds that could exist between different worlds. As the warriors stood around them, Lyra began to communicate more clearly. She traced symbols in the air, and faint glowing shapes appeared, showing a vision of distant stars, vast fleets of ships and worlds filled with knowledge and wonder. Cale's mind struggled to comprehend it all. He felt small, yet privileged, to witness even a glimpse of such a universe. Lyra's journey was part of something vast and magnificent, and he had been given a rare window into it. One of the warriors stepped forward and extended a small device toward Cale. Lyra gestured for him to take it. Hesitant, but trusting, Cale reached out. As soon as his fingers touched the smooth surface, images and information flowed into his mind. Maps of distant planets, records of civilizations, and the history of Lyra's people. It was overwhelming, but he felt a strange clarity. He understood now why she had trusted him, why she had survived against odds he could barely imagine. Amore spent several moments absorbing the information. He realized that these warriors, these guardians, were not only protectors of Lyra, but also keepers of knowledge, wisdom, and harmony across the galaxy. They traveled not to conquer, but to guide, to ensure that those who carried knowledge could survive, learn, and share. Cale felt a surge of admiration. He had always believed that humans had quiet strengths, but now he saw that even in a vast universe, courage, compassion, and understanding were the truest forms of power. Lyra finally turned to him, her glowing eyes soft and warm. She touched his hand lightly, and Cale felt a connection deeper than anything he had known. It was gratitude, respect, and perhaps something more, an acknowledgement of the bond they had formed in the quiet moments of the past week. Cale smiled, understanding without words that his life had changed forever. The warriors began to prepare to leave, their sleek forms moving with a grace that seemed almost unreal. Lyra stepped toward them, her wings unfolding in a display of beauty and strength. Cale felt a pang of sadness. He had grown attached to her, to the way her presence had transformed his world. Yet he understood that her place was among the stars, not confined to his small hut. Before departing, Lyra turned to Cale once more. She placed a small, glowing crystal in his hand. Its light pulsed gently, in rhythm with her touch. Cale held it carefully, feeling its warmth and energy. Though he could not fully comprehend its purpose, he understood that it was a gift, a token of connection between their worlds, a reminder that he had touched the universe in some small, meaningful way. As the warriors lifted Lyra into the sky, their forms shimmering like liquid light, Cale watched, amazed by the beauty and majesty of it all. She looked down at him one last time, wings spread wide, and a soft hum filled the air. Cale felt that hum resonate within him, a vibration of hope, courage, and the endless possibilities that lay beyond his small world. After they vanished into the distance, the forest seemed quieter, the night deeper, yet Cale did not feel lonely. He carried with him a sense of wonder, a knowledge that life was vast, interconnected, and filled with potential. Lyra's presence had changed him, opened his mind to the stars, and shown him that humans, even in their simplicity, had the ability to act with courage, kindness, and understanding. Cale returned to his hut, holding the crystal close. He placed it by the fire, and it glowed softly, casting shimmering patterns across the walls. He realized that he had not only saved a life, but he had also been part of a story much greater than himself. A story of trust, connection, and the quiet, extraordinary power of compassion. That night he looked up at the stars, feeling a new purpose stirring within him. He had glimpsed the universe in a way few could, and he understood that his life, though small in scale, could have an impact far beyond the forest, far beyond the planet, and perhaps even beyond the stars themselves. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders, challenges, and connections, waiting to be discovered. And Cale knew that, in his own way, he was ready to meet them. The memory of Lyra, glowing and beautiful among the stars, stayed with him. He thought of her often, imagining her exploring distant worlds, sharing knowledge, and moving with the grace and strength that had captivated him. But he also knew that he had learned something crucial from her presence. That courage, patience, and compassion could change lives, build bridges between worlds, and make even the smallest being capable of extraordinary acts. Cale sat quietly by the fire, the glowing crystal casting gentle light across the hut. The forest outside whispered in the night, and for the first time in his life, Cale felt connected, not only to the planet he called home, but to a universe that stretched endlessly beyond it. He knew the warriors and Lyra had moved on it, but their influence remained, guiding him, teaching him, inspiring him. And in that quiet moment, Cale understood that the journey had only just begun. The days after Lyra's departure felt different to Cale. The forest around his hut was the same. The soft rustle of leaves, the scent of wet soil, the distant chirping of small creatures, but the quiet now felt alive in a way he had never noticed before. The crystal Lyra had left him glowed softly on the table beside his bed, filling the room with gentle light. Its presence was comforting, but also a reminder that the universe was far bigger than his small world. Cale touched the crystal carefully, tracing the smooth edges with his fingers. When he did, he could sense a faint resonance, as if Lyra's energy lingered within it. It was not magic, Cale decided. It was something else, something he could not fully name. Knowledge, connection, understanding. A small gift from someone who had trusted him. Someone who had changed the course of his life without even realizing it. For several days, Cale simply observed the forest, the stars, and the small creatures he had always known. But he could not remain idle. Lyra had shown him that the universe was wide, filled with life and wisdom, and that his own world was part of something greater. He began to explore more carefully, mapping the forest paths, noting where medicinal herbs grew, and tracking the patterns of the stars at night. He felt a quiet determination to learn, to understand, and to prepare himself for whatever might come next. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and violet, Cale sat outside, gazing at the stars. The crystal pulsed gently beside him. He felt a strange sense of closeness to Lyra, as though she were watching the same sky, traveling among the stars, and thinking of him. He smiled softly. It was comforting, this connection across distances that seemed impossibly vast. Cale realized that he had changed. Before Lyra arrived, his life had been predictable and safe. But now, he understood courage in a deeper way. It was not only about protecting life in the moment. It was about trusting, learning, and opening oneself to the unknown. He had felt fear when the alien warriors arrived, but he had also felt awe, understanding, and purpose. That, Cale decided, was the true meaning of strength. Days turned into weeks. Calm continued his routines, but with new energy and curiosity. He worked in his garden, tending plants he had once ignored, noticing their growth and beauty. He observed the small creatures of the forest, studying their habits and patterns, and at night he studied the stars, tracing constellations and imagining distant worlds that might mirror his own in some way. The universe no longer seemed distant or unreachable. It felt alive, full of possibilities, and somehow welcoming him. One quiet morning, Cale heard a soft hum outside his hut. At first, he thought it was the wind, or perhaps a small creature. But the sound was deliberate, harmonious, and familiar. He stepped outside and saw the crystal glowing brighter than usual, its light pulsing in rhythm with the hum. Cale touched it again, and for the first time, he felt a vision forming in his mind. It was not a dream. It was a message, a fragment of knowledge from Lyra, showing him how to connect, understand, and prepare. The message was subtle, gentle, and full of meaning. Lyra's people had ways to share wisdom without words, and Cale began to understand that learning could happen in many forms. He saw glimpses of ships gliding silently through space, of other worlds filled with life, and of beings reaching out to understand one another. His heart swelled with hope. There was so much to discover, so much to learn, and he felt ready to face it all. Cale also began to notice something else. The small choices he made every day, the way he cared for his garden, observed the forest, and tended to the creatures, seemed to connect with the larger patterns of life. It was as if the universe responded to attention, kindness, and observation. He realized that courage and care were not limited to grand gestures. Even small, consistent actions could shape the world in meaningful ways. He thought often of Lyra and the alien warriors. Their departure had been awe-inspiring, but it had also left him with questions. How many worlds like his existed? How many beings traveled the stars, seeking knowledge, connection, or safety? And what role could he, a simple healer on a quiet planet, play in that vast universe? Cale felt both humbled and empowered. He might be small in scale, but he was capable of impact, of understanding, and of creating connections that mattered. One evening, Cale walked to the edge of the forest, the crystal glowing softly in his hand. The stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, and for the first time he felt that the universe was not a distant, untouchable place. It was near, alive, and full of stories waiting to be told. Cale thought of Lyra soaring through the sky with her protectors, of the worlds she had touched, and of the knowledge she had shared with him. He smiled, knowing that he had been part of something extraordinary. Cale also noticed a shift in himself. He felt more patient, more observant, and more aware of the subtle beauty in life. He watched the sunrise with gratitude, listened to the whispers of the forest, and marveled at the patterns of clouds in the sky. Even simple tasks, preparing food, tending the fire, repairing tools, felt imbued with new meaning. He realized that everyday life, when approached with awareness and care, could be as magical as the stars themselves. The crystal became more than a gift. It became a guide. Cale used it to understand patterns in nature, to track the growth of plants, and to notice changes in the forest. He felt a sense of connection to something much larger, and he began to record his observations, sketches, and thoughts. It was a quiet work, but one that gave him purpose. Each entry in his journal was a step toward understanding, a small bridge between his world and the wider universe that Lyra represented. Weeks later, Cale noticed movement in the sky. Not ships, not stars, but faint glimmers, like distant lights dancing among the constellations. He thought of Lyra, and wondered where she was, what she was learning, and what wonders she had discovered. A sense of peace settled over him. He might never meet her again, but her presence, her trust, and the lessons she had left behind had forever changed him. Cale returned to his hut, placing the crystal carefully by the fire. Its soft glow filled the room with a calm warmth. He thought of all the small actions that had led to this moment, the choice to help an injured being, the patience to care for her through the night, the willingness to learn and communicate without expectation. Those choices had rippled outward, connecting him to something far greater than he could have imagined. That night, as Cale lay under the soft light of the stars, he felt a quiet certainty. Life was vast, mysterious, and full of potential. He had glimpsed a universe that stretched beyond imagination, and he knew that courage, compassion, and understanding were the tools that could help him navigate it. He had learned that humans, even in their quiet lives, had the ability to shape the world, connect with others, and leave an impact that could stretch across galaxies. The forest whispered around him, The wind rustled through the leaves, and the stars shone with gentle brilliance. Call closed his eyes, feeling a sense of gratitude, wonder, and anticipation. He had met someone extraordinary, shared a bond that transcended words, and discovered the quiet power that came from caring, observing, and trusting. The crystal pulsed one last time, softly, like a heartbeat. Kale knew it was a reminder of what had been, what could be, and the endless possibilities that awaited him. Lyra's journey had continued among the stars, but Kale's journey had begun here, in his small hut, in the quiet forest, with the universe open before him. He smiled, knowing that the future, though uncertain, was full of promise. He would continue to learn, to observe, and to grow. He would share what he knew, care for life, and honor the connection he had made with Lyra and the alien warriors. And he understood, deeply, that courage was not always loud or visible. It was quiet, patient, and often gentle. It lived in the choices to help, to trust, and to act with understanding. As the night deepened, Kale drifted into sleep, the crystal glowing softly by his side. Outside, the stars twinkled like distant beacons, guiding travelers through the universe. Kale knew that somewhere out there, Lyra soared among them, carrying knowledge, hope, and the memory of a quiet healer who had dared to care. And he knew, in his heart, that humanity's greatest strength lay not in weapons or power, but in the ability to connect, to understand, and to act with compassion, even in the smallest of places. When morning came, Kale would rise, tend his garden, explore the forest, but he would do so with a new perspective, a sense of purpose, and the knowledge that he was part of something vast, beautiful, and extraordinary. And somewhere among the stars, Lyra would continue her journey, and their connection, though silent and unseen, would remain, a testament to courage, trust, and the quiet, enduring power of compassion.
I thought she would die. By morning, alien warriors stood outside my hut,